In 2015, Ms. Hassan-Kohli was arrested in her home after a local business owner spotted her son walking to school on his own. The business owners told the police, and they arrested Ms. Hassan-Kohli and charged her with risk of injury of a minor. And you might think that this is a really weird fringe case, or this is a case of parental negligence, that it's not that big of a deal. But in fact, when you really think about it, not many children walk to school anymore. It's not something that you really see. And if you were to ask someone's grandparents or parents if they walk to school, the answer is almost always yes. And the data really shows this. So in 1969, about 47% of children were walking or biking to school. About 38% were taking the bus, and only about 12% were really driven to school by their parents or another guardian. And now if you flip that over to 2009, if you fast forward, you'll see that only about 12% of children actually walk to school, while about 45% are being driven by their parents. This is a massive increase in the amount of vehicles on the road and a huge decrease in the amount of children that are actually walking to school. Now, the CDC wanted to find out why kids weren't walking to school anymore, and what they found out were the two biggest factors parents cited was the distance was too great and the traffic was way too much to allow their children to walk. A much smaller percentage saw that there was crime and that they didn't want their children to walk because of that, and a smaller percentage even than that said that it was against their school policy and it didn't allow them to allow their kids to walk to school. Now you can see where this kind of becomes a vicious cycle. If less kids are walking to school, then that means that there's way more traffic, and that means that there's way more danger. And that also means that kids are going to be more isolated if there's much fewer of them walking to school. And this kind of creates a vicious cycle. And it's no wonder that fewer and fewer children now are walking to school. So our question should be, well, are the distances too great? Well, in 1969, about 88% of children who were within a mile of their school did actually walk to school. But today, about 35% of children who live within a mile of the school actually walk to the school, meaning that parents see that a mile today is a little bit too far to allow their children to walk. The other issue is that schools are simply built farther away than they used to be. Whereas a school used to be built around a population center, today those schools are often built on the outskirts. And today, because of minimum acreage requirements forcing schools to be on a much larger campus than they used to be, schools have to be located on the outskirts of cities where the cost of the real estate is not as high. The last factor that we have to consider is that a lot of schools are now consolidating. So whereas a community might have had 4 or 5 schools servicing the population, now they've conglomerated into 1 or 2 mega schools that'll serve all the children in a town or city. Now, how does the United States fare when compared to other countries around the world? Well, if you look at Mexico and you look at India, for example, you'll see rates of walking to school in the high 60s. But you might think, well, these are developing countries. This isn't really a fair comparison. And you might be right, but even the United Kingdom has walking to school rates of about 46%. And amazingly, this is very, very similar to the rates that we had back in 1969. And you might ask, well, who are the kids that are walking to school? Is it the high schoolers and the middle schoolers? Well, it's actually not. The high schoolers are actually walking way, way less than the elementary and middle schoolers. And that is because they're suffering from a similar problem that we are, where the schools are conglomerating more and more into big super schools that'll house like whole communities. Whereas the elementary schools and the middle schools are still located near population centers, and you see much, much higher rates of walking in those grades. Now, the question you might be asking is, well, should children be walking to school? And I think the answer really should be yes. It'll depend on our values, but I think the answer is yes. And the reason is because by children walking to school, they do a few things. First off, they're getting their daily physical activity in the morning, they're learning a sense of independence, and we're also reducing the amount of vehicle miles traveled in the area that we're living. We'll reduce traffic, for example. We'll also be reducing emissions. So if that's something that we're planning on doing, then kids can definitely contribute and help by walking more to school. Now, there's a few things that we can do to encourage children to walk to school. And the first one is to really get kids who live within a mile to walk to school as much as possible, to encourage that as much as we can as a community. The second thing that we have to do, which is going to be a lot more difficult, is to relocate the schools closer to population centers and reduce minimum acreage requirements that force schools out into the outskirts of the cities and the towns and the population centers. So one program that is really aimed at increasing the number of children who walk and bike to school is called Safe Routes to School. And they do this through education programs where they teach children to cross the street, they teach them to get to school on their own, and they host a lot of events that make it okay to walk to school. They encourage the parents and the children to walk to school. They make them feel proud of being able to walk to school. And their target is really those children who live about within a mile of the school and are ages 10 and up, which they identify is the perfect age to start walking to school on their own. Now, I remember when I was 9 years old, and it was actually the first time that I walked home from school, and I remember it being a really short trip. My parents had forgotten me temporarily to pick me up, and so by the time that they realized that I had already reached home, and they were furious at me. They were so mad because they were afraid of me getting hit by a car, kidnapped, getting lost on the way. And they complained and complained to the school, and who knows, it's very possible that they could have sued the school over some sort of negligence like that. But just like we saw in the beginning of the story, it's very possible that they could have been actually arrested or gotten in trouble in some way by the authorities for allowing me to walk home from school. Now, as of 2016, that's not really the case anymore. The 2016 Every Child Succeed Act has a provision that allows children to walk to school, and this is kind of like to appease those free-range parents who believe that their children should have more independence, and maybe they're right in this situation. Maybe children should have a little bit more independence in this case. So what I want to know now is what you guys think. What is a distance that's close enough where a child can walk? Is it 0.25 miles? Is it 1/2 a mile? Is it 3/4 of a mile? Is it a full mile? Is it 2 miles? Let me know in the comments below. Let me know what you think the schools can do, and let me know what you guys think as parents you can do to encourage more kids to walk to school. Or if you don't think that should happen at all, let me know what you think. Oh, and don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps the channel tremendously, and I'll see you guys in the next video.